A Werewolf Shifter Romance, written by Amelia Hart. Chapter 1. The Cursed Omega. The forest surrounding my cabin held its breath in the moments before twilight, as if even nature understood that I was something to be feared. I stood at my workbench, grinding dried sage between my fingers, the scent mingling with rosemary and thyme hanging from the rafters above. 3 years of solitude had taught me to find comfort in silence, to measure my days by the herbs I collected and the tinctures I brewed. 3 years since my family cast me out for the curse I carried in my blood. My name is Elowen, and I am 24 years old, though sometimes I feel centuries older. The weight of isolation does that to a person. My wolf had barely stirred since that terrible day when I was 15, when my power manifested in the worst possible way and stole 2 years of memories from my younger sister Bryn's mind. I could still see her confused expression, the way she looked at our mother's face and asked who the strange woman was. Our mother had been dead for 3 years by then, but Bryn's 12-year-old mind had erased all memory of her passing, reverting to a time when she was still alive. The pack elders called me an aberration. Omegas were meant to be nurturing, gentle, the heart of the pack. We were not supposed to possess powers that could unravel minds. My father, Alpha of the Riverbend Pack, had no choice but to exile me. The old laws were clear about those who posed danger to their own kind. So I built this life in the wilderness, collecting plants that most shifters avoided, brewing remedies for ailments both common and strange. Occasionally, a desperate soul would find their way to my door, willing to risk the cursed Omega's touch for a cure. I never used my power anymore. The thought of reaching into someone's mind, of potentially erasing precious moments, made my stomach turn. The sun had nearly disappeared behind the tree line when I heard them. Wolves, not the feral kind that roamed these woods, but shifters moving with purpose through the underbrush. My heightened senses picked up the jingle of metal, the creak of leather, the rhythmic thud of horses' hooves. Many horses. I froze, sage still clutched in my hand. No one came this deep into the forest. No one except those who sought to stay hidden. And I had made certain my presence was barely a whisper among the trees. The pounding on my door came moments later, hard and commanding. Open. By order of the Alpha King. My heart stuttered. The Alpha King. Hadrian. I had never met him, of course. An exiled Omega had no place in the royal court. No reason to ever cross paths with the sovereign who ruled over all shifter territories. But everyone knew of him. 34 years old, powerful beyond measure, unmatched in combat, fair but merciless in judgment. He was the ultimate authority in our world, the king who commanded every alpha across the realm. I said open. The voice came again, sharp with impatience. My hands trembled as I crossed the small cabin. Through the gaps in the wooden door, I could see torchlight flickering, shadows of armed men, and the gleam of eyes that reflected gold in the darkness. Not just shifters. Royal guards. I pulled the door open slowly, keeping my gaze lowered in submission. Omega instincts ran deep, even in exile. Elowen of the Riverbend Pack. The speaker was a tall man with a warrior's build, his hand resting on the pommel of a sword strapped to his hip. Behind him stood at least a dozen guards, and beyond them, the massive forms of wolves in their shifted state. The display of force was overwhelming. Yes, I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. I am Captain Declan, head of the King's Guard. You are hereby commanded to accompany us to the royal castle. The Alpha King requires your presence immediately. My mind raced. This made no sense. There must be some mistake. I'm no one. I'm exiled. There is no mistake. His eyes held no sympathy, only the cold determination of a man following orders. You will come willingly, or you will come by force. The choice is yours, Omega. I glanced past him at the assembled guards. Even if I ran, even if I somehow managed to shift and flee into the forest, they would hunt me down. You did not refuse a direct command from the Alpha King. Not unless you wanted to be declared rogue, hunted and killed without mercy. May I gather some belongings? Declan nodded curtly. You have 5 minutes. I retreated into my cabin, my hands shaking as I pulled a worn leather satchel from beneath my bed. What did one pack when summoned by a king? I grabbed my warmest cloak, the gray wool one that had seen better days, and stuffed in a few basic supplies. My mind kept circling back to the same question. Why me? The journey to the castle took 2 days on horseback. They provided me with a gentle mare, but I was kept in the center of the formation, surrounded by guards at all times. No one spoke to me directly. I caught their sidelong glances, the way they kept their distance even when we made camp for the night, fear mixed with disgust in their sense. They knew what I was, what I could do. On the second day, the forest gave way to rolling hills, and then to farmland, small villages, and finally, the sprawling capital city that housed the royal castle. I had never seen anything like it. The castle rose from the earth like a mountain of gray stone, towers reaching toward the sky. Walls thick as houses were wide. Flags bearing the king's crest snapped in the wind, and even from a distance I could feel the weight of power that emanated from within those walls. We rode through streets crowded with merchants and craftsmen, past stone houses with thatched roofs, through market squares that smelled of bread and roasted meat. People stopped to stare at our procession, but their eyes glazed over me. I was nothing, invisible in my worn dress and travel-stained cloak. The castle gates opened before us with a groan of metal and wood. Inside, the courtyard was massive, paved with smooth stones and bordered by manicured gardens even in late autumn. Servants scurried about their duties, and more guards lined the walls. Everything spoke of wealth, power, and order. I was pulled from my horse and escorted through corridors that seemed to stretch forever. Tapestries hung from stone walls depicting great battles and ancient ceremonies. Torches burned in iron sconces, casting dancing shadows across the faces of stern ancestors captured in oil paintings. My simple leather boots made soft sounds against polished floors that reflected the firelight. Finally, we stopped before an enormous set of double doors carved with intricate wolf designs. 2 guards pulled them open, and I was ushered into the throne room. It took my breath away. The ceiling soared overhead, supported by massive wooden beams. More tapestries lined the walls, and at the far end of the hall, elevated on a stone dais, sat a throne carved from a single piece of dark oak, its arms shaped into snarling wolf heads. And in that throne sat Alpha King Hadrian, even seated. His presence dominated the space. He was tall, powerfully built, his broad shoulders draped in a black fur cloak that seemed to absorb the firelight. His hair fell in dark waves to his shoulders, parted in the middle, and framing a face that could have been carved from granite. A neatly trimmed beard covered his strong jaw, and his eyes, when they fixed on me, were the molten gold of a predator. I dropped to my knees immediately, head bowed. The weight of his attention felt physical, pressing down on me. "Rise." His voice was deep, commanding, and I obeyed without thought. Standing before him, I finally understood what it meant to face an Alpha King. This was not just power. It was absolute authority given form. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to submit, to bare my throat, to acknowledge his dominance. "Eloin of Riverbend," he said, and hearing my name in that voice made something inside me tremble. "I am told you possess an unusual ability, that you can erase memories." My throat went dry. "Yes, Your Majesty. I require your services." He leaned forward slightly, those golden eyes boring into mine. "You will remove a memory that has plagued me since childhood. You will do this, and you will do it successfully. It was not a request. It was an order. Your Majesty, I must explain." The words tumbled out before I could stop them, driven by desperation. "My power is unstable. I have no control over it. If I attempt to enter your mind, I could cause irreparable damage. I could erase the wrong memories, or worse, destroy parts of your consciousness entirely. I'm trying to protect you." His expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes. Frustration, perhaps, or calculation. "Then you will learn control." He stood, and I had to tilt my head back to keep his gaze. He descended the dais steps with measured grace, each footfall deliberate. He stopped mere feet from me, close enough that I could smell him. Cedar and winter wind, and something distinctly male. This castle contains the most extensive library in the realm. Ancient texts, forgotten knowledge, records of Omegas with abilities far stranger than yours. You will study them. You will master your power, and then you will do as I command. But your majesty, this is not a debate. His voice dropped lower, edged with steel. You are here because I require something only you can provide. You will remain in this castle until the task is complete. Chambers have been prepared for you in the South Tower. You will have access to whatever resources you need. Whatever else this was, it was not only about control. Keeping me within these stone walls meant keeping a power that could unmake minds from wandering unguarded through his borders. My mind reeled. He was not threatening me with prison, but the message was clear. I was not leaving until I had done what he asked. What if I refuse? I whispered, knowing it was foolish but unable to stop myself. His lips curved into something that was not quite a smile. Then you will remain here regardless, confined to those chambers, until you change your mind. I am not a man who accepts failure, Omega, nor am I one who releases valuable resources simply because they prove difficult. He turned away, his cloak sweeping behind him. Captain Declan will escort you to your quarters. We will speak again when you have had time to consider your situation. I was dismissed. Just like that. Declan's hand closed around my upper arm, not roughly, but firmly, and I was led from the throne room. My head spun with what had just happened. I had been summoned, commanded, and effectively imprisoned all within the span of minutes. The chambers I was brought to were in a tower that overlooked the castle gardens. They were more spacious than my entire cabin had been, with a real bed covered in quilts, a fireplace already burning, a window with actual glass, and even a separate washing room. It was luxury beyond anything I had known in 3 years. But it was still a cage. A young woman appeared in the doorway, carrying fresh linens. She had kind eyes and auburn hair pulled back in a braid. "My name is Seren," she said softly. "I've been assigned to attend to your needs while you're here. If you require anything, you need only ask." I sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted. Why does the Alpha King need me? What memory could be so terrible that he would bring an exiled Omega into his castle? Seren hesitated, her gaze darting to the door as if checking for listeners. Then she moved closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "The king has not slept properly in weeks. Every night he suffers terrible nightmares. The whole castle hears his screams. Whatever haunts him, it's destroying him from the inside. And when an Alpha King weakens, the entire realm feels it." She left me then, and I was alone with my thoughts. I moved to the window, staring out at the darkening sky. Somewhere in this massive castle, a king was being torn apart by his own mind. And somehow, I was supposed to be his salvation. The irony was not lost on me. The cursed Omega, brought to save the most powerful shifter in existence. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass and tried not to think about all the ways this could go horribly wrong. Chapter 2. Ancient Whispers. The castle library was a cathedral of knowledge, 3 stories tall, with galleries wrapping around the perimeter and ladders that rolled along iron tracks to reach the highest shelves. Sunlight poured through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. The scent of aged parchment, leather bindings, and candle wax permeated everything. I had spent the last 4 days here, escorted each morning by a silent guard who stationed himself outside the massive oak doors. I pulled another volume from the shelf, this one bound in faded green leather, its title barely legible. Properties of Omega Consciousness, a study by scholar Meredith of Thornhill. My fingers traced the gold-embossed letters before I carried it to the table where I had accumulated a small mountain of similar texts. Serene arrived with lunch, a tray bearing bread, cheese, and cold meat. She set it down quietly beside my books, her gaze sweeping over the titles. "You have been working yourself to exhaustion," she observed, concern evident in her voice. "I do not have the luxury of rest," I replied, not looking up from the page I was reading. It detailed an Omega from 2 centuries past who could manipulate emotional memories, dulling painful ones while enhancing joyful recollections. The technique described involved entering a meditative state and visualizing memories as threads of different colors. "The king has been asking about your progress." Seren sat down across from me, her hands folded in her lap. He grows impatient. I finally met her eyes. Tell me something, Seren. You said he has nightmares. How bad are they? She hesitated, glancing toward the door before speaking in hushed tones. The servants closest to the royal chambers say his screams wake half the castle. Sometimes he thrashes so violently that furniture breaks. Once, he partially shifted in his sleep, his claws tearing through the bedding. The guards posted outside his door stand ready every night, unsure if they will need to protect him or protect others from him. My stomach twisted. An Alpha King losing control of his shift was dangerous beyond measure. If he fully shifted while unconscious, driven by whatever terror plagued his dreams, he could kill without ever meaning to. Do you know what the nightmares are about? I asked quietly. Seren shook her head. He speaks of it to no one, but there are rumors. Always rumors in a place like this. Some say it involves his brother. His brother? Theodore, the king's twin. He died when they were children, 10 years old. No one speaks of how it happened. It's forbidden to mention Theodore's name in the royal court. She leaned closer. But servants talk, and old guards remember. Whatever occurred that day, it changed Hadrian completely. He was a different boy after. I sat back in my chair, processing this information. A childhood trauma involving a dead sibling, the worst kind of memory to carry, especially for someone who would grow up to bear the weight of an entire realm on his shoulders. There is something else you should know, Seren continued, her voice dropping even lower. Other alphas are beginning to notice the king's condition. They gather for the quarterly council in 6 weeks. If Hadrian appears weak before them, there will be challenges to his authority. Some might even attempt to claim territories for themselves. The political implications were staggering. Hadrian was not just suffering personally. His entire kingdom hung in the balance. Then I need to work faster, I murmured, turning my attention back to the text. The afternoon passed in concentrated study. I discovered references to meditation techniques, to practices that involved synchronizing one's own consciousness with another's, creating a temporary bridge that would allow for precise manipulation of specific memories. But all the texts warned of the same dangers I already knew too well. One wrong move, one moment of lost concentration, and the damage could be catastrophic. I was deep in a particularly dense chapter about neural pathways when I sensed him before I heard him. The air in the library shifted, growing heavier, charged with an undeniable presence. I looked up to find Alpha King Hadrian standing in the doorway. He had exchanged the formal fur cloak for simpler attire, a black leather tunic that emphasized his powerful build, dark breeches, and boots. But he still wore that thick gold chain around his neck, resting against his chest, where the tunic laced loosely. Even in less formal clothing, he radiated authority. His golden eyes found mine immediately. "Leave us," he commanded. And though he spoke quietly, Serene was on her feet and out the door within seconds. I stood slowly, keeping my spine straight, even as every Omega instinct screamed at me to bow, to submit. "Your Majesty." He crossed the library with measured steps, his gaze sweeping over the books scattered across my table. "You have been avoiding me. I have been studying, as you commanded. And have you found what you need?" I gestured to the open volume before me. "I am learning techniques that might allow for more precision in memory manipulation. But theory and practice are vastly different things. I need to understand what I am dealing with before I attempt anything." He picked up one of the books, examining the cover with apparent interest. Scholar Meredith of Thornhill. I remember her work being controversial in her time. She argued that Omega abilities were not lesser than Alpha strength, merely different in application. She was correct. The words left my mouth before I could consider whether contradicting a king was wise. We are not weak, simply because our power does not manifest in physical combat. His lips quirked slightly, almost a smile. "No, you are not." He set the book down and fixed me with that intense stare. "Walk with me. You have spent days buried in these texts. Perhaps conversation will prove more enlightening." It was not a request. I followed him from the library, down corridors I had not yet explored. The guard who had been stationed outside fell into step behind us, maintaining a respectful distance. "You wanted to understand what you are dealing with," Hadrian said as we walked. Then I will tell you. 3 weeks ago, the nightmares began. Before that, I slept as well as any man with a kingdom to rule. But something triggered them, and now they come every night without fail. What changed 3 weeks ago? I visited the Northern Territories, where I was born, where Theodore and I grew up before our father became king. He spoke the name carefully, as if testing its weight. It was the first time I had returned there in over 20 years. Perhaps that was enough to wake sleeping ghosts. We emerged onto a covered walkway that overlooked the castle gardens. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of dying leaves and approaching winter. Hadrian stopped at the stone railing, his hands gripping the carved edge. "My brother died because of me," he said, his voice low and rough. "That is the heart of what torments me, the memory of his death and my role in it." I stood beside him, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body in the cool air. "Will you tell me what happened?" He was silent for a long moment, and I thought perhaps he would refuse. Then he spoke, his gaze fixed on the distant trees beyond the garden walls. "Something terrible happened with my brother when we were children. Theodore was always weaker than me, more gentle. Father worried he would not survive in our world. I was everything Theodore was not: strong, aggressive, quick to anger." His jaw tightened. "The specifics, those I keep locked away even from myself most of the time. But I know that when Theodore died, it was my fault. That knowledge has always been there. A weight I carry, but the nightmares, they make me relive it in ways I cannot control." I processed this carefully. He was revealing vulnerability, but still maintaining distance. Whatever the full truth was, he was not yet ready to speak it aloud. "The memory you want me to erase," I said slowly. "You understand that removing it entirely might change fundamental aspects of who you are? Our traumas shape us, for better or worse." He turned to face me fully, and I found myself trapped in his gaze. "I do not seek to erase it completely. I seek release from the torment. I need to function, to lead, to sleep through a single night without waking in terror. Can you do that? Can you take away the nightmares while leaving the lesson intact?" "I do not know," I admitted. "The text suggests it is possible, but I have never attempted anything so delicate. My power manifested violently, without control. Teaching myself precision now feels impossible. Yet you must try." He stepped closer, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. "I am not asking you to perform miracles tomorrow. I am giving you time, resources, whatever you need. But I need to know you are truly working toward a solution, not simply hiding in my library." "I am not hiding," I said, though my voice wavered slightly. His proximity was doing strange things to my senses. I could smell him more strongly now. That cedar and winter wind scent mixed with something uniquely his. My wolf, dormant for so long, stirred faintly in response. "Good." His hand lifted, and for a breathless moment, I thought he might touch my face. Instead, he reached past me to pick up a book I had tucked under my arm, the one I had been carrying when we left the library. His fingers brushed mine in the process, and the brief contact sent a jolt through my entire body. If he noticed my reaction, he gave no sign. He examined the book, reading the title aloud. "Advanced Techniques in Memory Threading." His golden eyes flicked back to mine. "This is promising. It suggests that memories are not single events, but collections of sensory details, emotions, and contextual information all woven together," I explained, trying to focus on the academic discussion rather than the way my heart was racing. "If I can learn to see those individual threads, I might be able to remove only the ones causing distress while leaving the core memory intact." "Show me." He held the book open to a diagram that illustrated the concept, a memory represented as multiple colored strands braided together. I moved closer to see the page properly, and suddenly we were standing far too close for propriety. I could feel the warmth of his chest mere inches from my shoulder, could hear the steady rhythm of his breathing. "The red threads represent raw emotion," I said, pointing to the diagram while trying to ignore the way my hand trembled. "Fear, pain, anger. The blue threads are sensory details, what was seen, heard, felt physically. The green threads are understanding, the context that gives the memory meaning. And to remove the nightmares, You would remove the red threads? Theoretically. But emotions are not separate from experience. If I remove too much, the memory becomes meaningless, fragmented. Remove too little, and the nightmares persist. I looked up at him, finding his face much closer than I had anticipated. It requires a precision I do not yet possess. For several heartbeats, neither of us moved. The moment stretched, heavy with something I could not name. Then Hadrian stepped back deliberately, creating distance. "Then you will practice," he said, his voice once again formal and controlled. "Use your own memories first. Learn the feel of those threads, how to grasp them without severing the wrong ones. When you are ready, inform me." He turned to leave, then paused. "And Eloan, thank you for being honest about your limitations. Lesser people would have promised success simply to gain favor. Your integrity is noted." He left then, the guard trailing after him, and I was alone in the walkway with a book clutched to my chest and my mind in chaos. The Alpha King had just thanked me. More than that, he had shared something deeply personal, had allowed me to see behind the crown and the authority to the man beneath. I returned to my chambers that night with a new determination. Serene brought dinner, but I barely touched it, too focused on preparing for what I needed to attempt. If I was going to help Hadrian, I needed to first prove to myself that I could control my power. Sitting cross-legged on my bed, I closed my eyes and turned my focus inward, searching for a memory to practice on. I settled on something small and relatively meaningless. The day I learned to make bread from my mother when I was 8 years old. A happy memory, but one whose loss would not devastate me. Following the techniques outlined in the texts, I visualized the memory as threads of color. The blue of my mother's eyes as she smiled at me. The red of my frustration when the dough would not cooperate. The green of understanding when she showed me the proper kneading technique. The gold of joy when I pulled my first successful loaf from the oven. Slowly, carefully, I reached for one of the red threads, the frustration. In my mind's eye, I grasped it, and gently, so gently, began to unravel it from the weave. The memory flickered. For a terrifying moment, I thought I had lost it entirely. Then it stabilized, reformed. Slightly different now. I could still recall the day, still see my mother's face, still feel the texture of the dough beneath my hands. But the frustration was gone, replaced by a neutral calm. I opened my eyes, my heart pounding. It had worked. On a small scale, with a simple memory, I had actually succeeded in threading. It was far from what Hadrian needed. The memory I had altered was decades old, already faded with time, attached to no particular trauma. What he required was infinitely more complex and dangerous. But this was a start. That night, for the first time since arriving at the castle, I felt something other than fear and uncertainty. I felt the faintest stirring of hope. Chapter 3. Midnight. Offering. The scream tore through the castle like a blade through flesh, jolting me awake from restless sleep. I sat bolt upright in bed, my heart hammering against my ribs as the sound echoed through the stone corridors. It was raw, agonized, barely human, and I knew instantly who it came from. Another scream followed, this one worse than the first, carrying notes of pure terror that made my wolf whimper inside me. I threw off the quilts and grabbed my robe, pulling it on as I rushed to the door. The guard posted outside my chamber looked pale, his hand gripping his sword hilt so tightly his knuckles had gone white. "The king," I said, and it was not a question. He nodded stiffly, his jaw clenched. "It happens most nights, my lady. Best to return to your room." But another scream came, and this time I heard something else beneath it, the sound of splintering wood, of something heavy hitting stone. Hadrian was not just dreaming. He was destroying his own chambers in his sleep. I did not think. I simply moved, pushing past the startled guard and running barefoot down the corridor. I had explored the castle during my days here, had learned which passages led where. The royal chambers were one floor below mine, at the heart of the castle's main structure. "My lady, you cannot." The guard's voice followed me, but I did not stop. I rounded corners, my robe streaming behind me, following the sounds of anguish that grew louder with each step. Other servants had emerged from their quarters, huddled in doorways with frightened expressions. They pointed me toward the king's chambers, though I hardly needed direction. 2 guards stood outside massive double doors, and through the gaps I could see flickering firelight and shadows moving violently. One guard had his hand raised to knock, the other looked ready to bolt. They both turned as I approached, their expressions shifting from relief to confusion. "Lady Elowen, you should not be here," the taller one said. "The king has ordered that no one enter during these episodes." "He brought me here to help him," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Let me through. Our orders are clear." Another crash from inside, followed by a sound that was half growl, half scream. The animalistic nature of it made my blood run cold. He was shifting. Partially, at least, his control fracturing under the weight of whatever nightmare held him. If he fully shifts while unconscious, he could kill someone when he wakes, I said urgently. "Is that what you want? To stand here following orders while your king tears himself apart?" The guards exchanged glances. Finally, the shorter one reached for the door handle. "On your head be it, my lady." He pushed the door open, and I slipped inside before either could reconsider. The king's chambers were chaos. The massive bed had been torn apart, quilts shredded, the wooden frame cracked down the middle. Furniture lay scattered and broken, a table reduced to splinters, a chair embedded in the far wall. Tapestries hung in tatters. And in the center of it all, thrashing on what remained of the bed, was Hadrian. He was drenched in sweat, his powerful body writhing as if fighting invisible chains. His hands had shifted into claws that dug into the ruined mattress, and I could see the muscles of his back rippling beneath his torn sleeping shirt as his wolf fought to emerge fully. His face was contorted in agony, eyes moving rapidly behind closed lids. "No," he gasped out, the word broken and desperate. "Theodore, no, I did not mean it. Please, brother, please." The pain in his voice nearly brought me to my knees. This was not just a nightmare. This was active torture, his mind replaying whatever horror had taken his brother from him over and over without mercy. I approached slowly, carefully avoiding the debris scattered across the floor. "Your Majesty," I called softly. "Hadrian." He did not respond, too deep in the grip of his torment. His claws flexed, tearing through more fabric, and I saw blood on his hands where he had apparently injured himself in his struggles. There was no time for hesitation. I knew from my reading that waking someone mid-shift was dangerous. Their instincts might perceive any touch as attack, but I could not stand by and watch him destroy himself. I climbed onto what remained of the bed, kneeling beside him. Up close, the evidence of his suffering was even more apparent. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. His face was drawn with exhaustion, and his entire body trembled. How many nights had he endured this? How much longer could he sustain it before something broke permanently? "Hadrian," I said again, my voice calm despite my racing heart. "I am here. You are safe." Slowly, carefully, I reached out and placed my hand on his temple. The moment my skin made contact with his, power flared between us, sharp and electric. His wolf recognized mine instantly, even in sleep, the connection between our kinds responding to proximity. I had not planned this, had not prepared or practiced for entering someone's mind in the midst of active trauma. But the texts had mentioned that omegas possessed an innate calming ability, something we could project to soothe distress. I had never consciously used it, but desperation made me reach for that instinct now. Closing my eyes, I focused on the connection point where my hand met his skin. I did not try to enter his memories, did not attempt to see what he was dreaming. Instead, I simply sent waves of calm through that connection, imagining it as cool water washing over flames. His thrashing slowed, the growls quieted. Gradually, his breathing began to even out, the desperate gasps giving way to something steadier. His claws retracted, shifting back to human hands, and the terrible tension in his body eased. I kept my hand where it was, maintaining the gentle flow of soothing energy. The technique I had read about in one of Scholar Meredith's texts called it emotional resonance, the ability to share one's own state of mind with another through direct contact. I poured every ounce of tranquility I could muster into Hadrian, willing him away from whatever darkness held him captive. Minutes passed. The fire in the hearth crackled, the only sound now in the devastated chamber. Hadrian's breathing deepened further, falling into the rhythm of genuine sleep rather than nightmare-induced panic. His face relaxed, the lines of pain smoothing away. For the first time in weeks, according to Seren's account, the Alpha King rested. I should have removed my hand then. Should have backed away and left him to this rare peace, but I found myself frozen, watching his face in the firelight. Without the authority and power he wore like armor, he looked younger, almost vulnerable. The strong line of his jaw, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead, the unexpected softness of his mouth when not set in command. My hand was still against his temple when his eyes opened. They were gold, glowing faintly in the dim light, and they focused on me with startling clarity. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. Then his hand shot up, closing around my wrist with shocking speed, and I gasped. Ilawan. My name on his lips sent an involuntary shiver through me. His grip was firm but not painful, his thumb resting against my racing pulse. What are you doing here? You were screaming, I said quietly. The whole castle could hear you. I thought I could help. His gaze moved from my face to where my hand still rested against his temple, then back again. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or confusion. And did you? Help? You are not screaming now. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, there and gone in an instant. No, I am not. He released my wrist but did not move away. Instead, he sat up slowly, taking in the destruction surrounding us. His jaw tightened. This is worse than usual. Serene said the nightmares have been affecting you for weeks. I withdrew my hand carefully, though part of me mourned the loss of contact. What I just did, calming you without entering your memories, it is something I could do every night, until you are ready for the full procedure. He turned to look at me fully, and the intensity in his gaze made my breath catch. You would do that? Sit with me while I sleep? Keep the nightmares at bay? It would give me time to continue learning control, I said, though that was not the only reason. The truth was, I could not bear the thought of him suffering night after night, while I hid in my tower practicing on insignificant memories, and it would allow you to rest properly. You need your strength. What I need, he said, his voice dropping lower, is for you to understand what you are offering, to be in my presence during my most vulnerable hours, to touch me while I am defenseless. It implies a level of trust that goes beyond healer and patient. Are you saying you do not trust me? I am saying that I do, which should terrify us both. He stood, and I was reminded of his sheer size, the way he dominated any space he occupied. He wore only sleeping breeches, his chest bare, and I could see the play of muscles beneath his skin as he moved, see the scars from past battles that marked him. You are an Omega whose power could destroy my mind. Logic dictates I should keep you at a distance, yet something in me wants to draw you closer. The confession hung between us, dangerous and thrilling. I climbed off the destroyed bed, acutely aware that I wore only my nightgown beneath the robe, that my hair hung loose down my back, that we were very much alone in the intimate space of his chambers. Then we both proceed with caution, I said, proud that my voice did not shake. You allow me to help you sleep. I continue to study and practice. When I am confident in my abilities, we attempt the full memory work. Until then, we maintain appropriate boundaries. He studied me for a long moment, and I could not read what passed behind those golden eyes. Then he nodded once, decisive. Very well. You will come to my chambers each night. I will have a chair brought in for you, something more suitable than kneeling on my bed. The slight emphasis on the last words made heat rise to my cheeks, and from the way his lips quirked, he noticed. I should return to my rooms, I said quickly, before the guards decide to break down the door to rescue you from the dangerous Omega. They would not dare, but there was amusement in his tone now, the heaviness of his nightmare finally lifting. Though you are perhaps more dangerous than they realize, you breached my chambers, calmed my wolf, and negotiated terms with me all while I was at my most vulnerable. That takes either exceptional courage or exceptional foolishness. Perhaps a bit of both, I admitted. He moved closer, and once again I was struck by how his presence seemed to fill all available space. How my wolf responded to his proximity with a restlessness I had not felt in years. He reached out, and I thought he might touch my face, but instead, he gently pulled my robe more securely closed where it had slipped open at my shoulder. "Sleep well, Eowyn," he said softly. "I will see you tomorrow evening." The dismissal was clear, but it lacked the coldness of command. I curtsied, aware it was probably awkward given my state of undress, and fled to the door. The guards outside looked relieved to see me emerge unharmed. One even went so far as to check the chamber behind me, as if confirming the king still lived. I returned to my tower in a daze, my mind replaying every moment of that encounter. I had touched him, had seen him vulnerable and struggling, and had somehow managed to bring him peace. And he had thanked me for it, had shown me a glimpse of the man beneath the crown. Seren was waiting in my chambers when I arrived, pacing nervously. "Thank the moon goddess," she breathed when she saw me. "When I heard you had gone to him, I feared the worst. The king can be dangerous when caught in his nightmares." "He was in pain," I said simply, moving to wash my hands in the basin by my window. "I could not leave him to suffer." "You have a healer's heart," Seren observed. "Even for those who command you." Did I? Or was there something else driving my actions? Something I was not yet ready to acknowledge? The way my pulse had raced when he looked at me? The warmth that had flooded through me at his proximity? These were not the responses of a simple healer to her patient. But I pushed those thoughts aside. I was here to help the king overcome his trauma, to master my power and prove it could be used for good rather than harm. Anything else was dangerous territory, a complication neither of us could afford. That night, for the first time since arriving at the castle, I dreamed of golden eyes and a touch that had felt like coming home. Chapter 4. Threading Hearts. 3 weeks had passed since I began my nightly vigils in Hadrian's chambers. 3 weeks of sitting in the high-backed chair positioned beside his bed, my hand resting lightly against his temple as he slept. 3 weeks of watching the king of all shifters let down his guard in ways I suspected few had ever witnessed. The routine had become familiar, almost comfortable. Each evening after dinner, I would make my way to his chambers, often passing courtiers who whispered behind their hands, guards who watched with knowing expressions. Let them speculate. The Alpha King slept peacefully for the first time in months, and that was all that mattered. But lately, the arrangement had become more complicated, because the line between healer and patient had begun to blur in ways that kept me awake long after I returned to my tower each night. I was in the library when Finian found me. The king's chief counselor was an older man, perhaps 50 years, with silver threading through his dark hair and sharp gray eyes that missed nothing. He had largely avoided me during my time at the castle, though I had felt his gaze on me more than once during formal dinners. "Lady Eowyn," he said, his voice carrying the refined accent of someone raised among nobility. "I wonder if I might have a word." I looked up from the text I had been studying, a detailed account of Omega abilities from the previous century. "Of course, counselor." He settled into the chair across from me, his movements careful, measured. For a long moment he simply studied me, and I resisted the urge to fidget under that penetrating stare. "You have been spending considerable time with His Majesty," he finally said. "The entire court has noticed." "I am helping him sleep," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "As he commanded." "Indeed, and you have been remarkably successful. The king has not looked this well rested in weeks." Finian leaned forward slightly, "which makes me curious about your methods. What exactly are you doing each night?" I considered how much to reveal. "I use a calming technique. Emotional resonance, the texts call it. I project tranquility through physical contact, which soothes his mind without directly manipulating his memories. A stopgap measure. Yes, I am still working toward the precision needed for the full procedure." I met his eyes steadily. "Unless you have advice on how I might progress faster." Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the edges. He reached into his robe and withdrew a small leather-bound journal. its cover worn smooth with age. I did not seek you out to question your progress. I came to offer assistance. He set the journal on the table between us. I picked it up carefully, opening to a page covered in elegant handwriting. The title read, Observations on Omega Consciousness Manipulation by Finian of House Greystone. I looked up sharply. You wrote this? Many years ago, when I was a much younger man with a daughter who possessed extraordinary gifts. His voice carried old pain, carefully controlled. Marin could heal with her touch, not just physical wounds but emotional ones as well. She could draw pain from others, absorb their trauma temporarily to give them respite. What happened to her? I asked softly. She died at 16. There were no texts, no teachers who understood her abilities. She tried to heal a soldier who had returned from war with his mind shattered, and she took too much of his anguish into herself. By the time we realized what was happening, the damage was irreversible. He paused, composing himself. I spent years afterwards studying Omega powers, trying to understand what had taken my daughter from me. That journal contains everything I learned. I looked down at the journal in my hands, feeling the weight of it, both physical and emotional. Why give this to me now? Because I see something of Marin in you, the same determination to use your gift for good despite the risks, the same gentle strength beneath the fear. He stood, preparing to leave. And because the king needs you to succeed, not just for his own sake, but for the realm's. Read what I have written. Practice the techniques carefully. And when you are ready, I will help you prepare for the procedure. He left before I could properly thank him. But I clutched the journal to my chest, understanding the significance of what he had shared. This was not just knowledge. This was trust. From a man who had lost everything to Omega power misused. I spent the rest of the afternoon absorbed in Finian's notes. His observations were precise, detailed, based on years of watching his daughter work. He described techniques for entering another's mind safely, for identifying specific memories without becoming lost in the vast network of consciousness, for threading through emotional content without severing critical connections. One passage struck me particularly. The greatest danger in memory work is not the power itself, but the emotional toll it takes on the wielder. To touch another's pain so intimately is to risk absorbing it. Omegas must learn to maintain boundaries, to observe without internalizing. This is the hardest lesson and the most crucial. I thought of Hadrian's nightmares, of the raw anguish I felt radiating from him each night. I had been careful to keep my soothing superficial, never delving deep into what tormented him. But the full procedure would require me to do exactly that, to immerse myself in his worst memory and somehow emerge unscathed. Could I do that? Could I witness his trauma without being destroyed by it? That evening, I arrived at Hadrian's chambers earlier than usual, the journal still tucked under my arm. He was not yet prepared for bed. Instead, standing by the window in his sleeping breeches and an unlaced white shirt, staring out at the darkening sky. He turned when I entered, and something in his expression made me pause. The usual guarded control had slipped, revealing something raw underneath. My father visited Theodore's grave today, he said without preamble. I accompanied him. It was the first time I had been there since the burial. I set the journal aside carefully and moved closer. How did it feel? Like reopening a wound that never properly healed. He turned back to the window. My father spoke of Theodore as if he had been perfect, untainted by the harshness of our world. He always did that. Painted my brother as something pure that I had destroyed with my violence. The bitterness in his voice was palpable. I came to stand beside him, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his skin in the cool chamber. Tell me about Theodore, I said gently. Not about his death, but about who he was when he lived. Hadrian was silent for so long I thought he might not answer. Then, slowly, he began to speak. He was gentle in ways that terrified our father. He preferred books to swords, music to combat training. He would spend hours in the gardens, talking to the plants as if they might answer. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. He once convinced me to help him rescue a wounded fox from a trap, even though we were supposed to be learning to hunt. We nursed it back to health in secret. And when father found out, he had the fox killed and made us watch. The cruelty of that act made my chest ache. How old were you? 8. He met my eyes. That was when Theodore stopped trying to be what Father wanted. He retreated into himself, grew quieter. Father saw it as weakness. I saw it as survival. You protected him, I said, understanding dawning. In your own way. I tried. I drew Father's attention away from him. Made myself the strong son so Theodore could simply exist, but it was never sufficient. Father pushed harder, demanded more, and then the night of our first transformation came, and everything ended. He fell silent again, the muscle in his jaw working as he fought some internal battle. I reached out, my hand finding his where it rested on the window ledge. His fingers immediately closed around mine, holding tight as if I were an anchor in a storm. When you are ready, I said quietly, when you can bear to share the full memory with me, I will help you carry that weight. You have carried it alone for too long. He looked down at our joined hands, then back at my face. You say that as if you are not afraid of what you might find in my mind. I am terrified, I admitted, but I am also determined. Whatever happened to Theodore, whatever role you played, it has defined you for over 2 decades. It is time to release at least some of that burden. And you think you can do that? Truly. Finian gave me his daughter's journal today. The techniques she used, the knowledge he gained through watching her work. It is exactly what I needed. I held up our joined hands. And I have been practicing every night, learning to read the subtleties of your emotional state, to navigate the edges of your consciousness without crossing into territory that requires more invasive work. I am not ready yet, but I am closer than I have ever been. Something shifted in his expression, heat entering his gaze that had nothing to do with nightmares or memory work. Do you have any idea what these weeks have been doing to me? His voice dropped lower, almost a growl. Watching you every evening, knowing you will be the last thing I see before I sleep, and the first thing I see when I wake, feeling your gentle touch, anchoring me to peace when I have known nothing but torment. My breath caught. Hadrian, I know I should maintain distance. I know you are here under my command, that I hold power over you in ways that make any relationship between us complicated at best, dangerous at worst. He released my hand only to reach up, his fingers brushing along my jaw with aching gentleness. But I find myself thinking about you during war councils, watching for you at dinner, finding excuses to visit the library when I know you are there. I have noticed, I whispered, my heart pounding so hard I was certain he could hear it. I have noticed everything. His thumb traced my lower lip, sending sparks of sensation through my entire body. My wolf rose to the surface, responding to his proximity with a hunger I had not felt in years. This is unwise, he murmured, even as he leaned closer. You are here to heal me, not to become entangled in whatever this is between us. Perhaps healing and connection are not separate things, I said, tilting my face up toward his. Perhaps we need both. The distance between us evaporated. His mouth found mine in a kiss that was nothing like I had imagined in the secret fantasies I barely acknowledged. It was not gentle or tentative. It was consuming, desperate. Years of his loneliness meeting years of my isolation in a collision that threatened to unmake us both. His arms came around me, pulling me flush against the solid heat of his body. I wound my fingers into his hair, rising on my toes to meet him more fully. Every nerve ending came alive. Every sense heightened until all I could perceive was him. His taste, his scent. The way his hands spanned my waist as if he could not bear to let me go. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. This changes things, he said roughly. I know. We should stop, before it goes further. We should, I agreed, but neither of us moved. He drew back slightly, his golden eyes searching mine. When this is done, when I am free of these nightmares and you have proven your power can be controlled, I want to explore what this is between us properly. With no commands, no obligations, just 2 people making a choice. And until then? I asked, though my heart already knew the answer. Until then, we exercise restraint that will likely drive us both mad. He smiled, a real smile that transformed his face into something almost boyish. But knowing there is something to look forward to might make the waiting bearable. I nodded, stepping back reluctantly. The space between us felt like a physical loss. But I understood his reasoning. Whatever was growing between us needed to develop on equal ground, not in the complicated tangle of healer and patient, Omega and Alpha King. I should let you rest, I said, moving toward my usual chair. Unless you would prefer I return to my chambers tonight? Stay. The word was immediate, almost involuntary. Please. I sleep better with you here. That has not changed. So I stayed, settling into the chair as he climbed into bed. He watched me as I reached out to touch his temple, my fingers finding their familiar place. But now there was a new awareness between us, an acknowledgement of what had been building beneath the surface these past weeks. Elowen, he said as his eyes began to drift closed, my calming energy already working its magic. Yes, thank you. For everything. For your patience, your skill, your willingness to shoulder my burdens. His voice was growing drowsy, and for that kiss. I have thought about almost nothing else for days. Heat flooded my cheeks, but I smiled. Sleep, Hadrian. Dream of something pleasant for once. With you here, how could I not? He fell asleep within minutes, his breathing evening out, his face relaxing into peace. I sat there in the firelight, my hand maintaining its gentle contact, and tried to process everything that had shifted between us in the span of a single conversation. I had come to this castle as a prisoner and a tool, an exile with no purpose beyond being used for my dangerous gift. But somehow, in the quiet moments of healing this broken king, I had found something I never expected. Connection, understanding, and possibly, terrifyingly, the beginnings of something deeper than I had ever known. Chapter 5. The Ritual of Truth. The morning sun filtered through the stained glass windows of the small chapel, casting colored light across the stone floor. Hadrian stood before the altar, his back to me, shoulders tense beneath his black leather tunic. We had come here alone, except for Finian, who waited in the antechamber, ready to assist if needed. Are you certain this is necessary? I asked, moving to stand beside him. The chapel was ancient, predating even the current castle, its walls carved with symbols from the old religion, when shifters still honored the moon goddess as their primary deity. The ceremony requires sacred ground, Hadrian replied, his voice steady despite the strain I could see in the set of his jaw. What I am about to share with you, what you are about to witness, it cannot be done casually. The old texts are clear. A memory this deeply buried, this heavily guarded, needs ritual to safely expose it. A week had passed since that kiss, since everything between us had shifted into territory, both exhilarating and terrifying. We had been careful since then, maintaining the boundaries he had insisted upon, but the awareness simmered constantly beneath the surface. Every shared glance carried weight. Every accidental touch sent sparks through my nervous system. But today was not about whatever was growing between us. Today was about the work I had been brought here to do. Finian entered, carrying an ornate wooden box. He set it on the altar and opened it to reveal bundles of dried herbs, a clay bowl, and a small ceremonial knife. The preparation ritual, he explained, his voice taking on the formal cadence of someone reciting ancient instruction. You will need to synchronize your consciousness with His Majesty's before attempting any deep memory work. This ceremony has been used for centuries when Omegas needed to access particularly guarded areas of an Alpha's mind. How long will it take? Hadrian asked. A week of daily sessions. Each day you will meditate together, aligning your breathing, your heartbeats, your very essence. By the end, Lady Elowen will be able to navigate your mental landscape as easily as walking through a familiar forest. Finian began arranging the herbs in the bowl. But I must warn you both. This level of synchronization often reveals more than just the target memory. You may see fragments of each other's pasts, feel echoes of each other's emotions. The boundaries between your minds will blur. I met Hadrian's gaze across the altar. His golden eyes held mine, and I saw the question there. Was I prepared for this? For the intimacy of truly knowing another person's mind, for letting him know mine in return. I am ready, I said firmly, Whatever it takes to help you, I will do it. Something flickered in his expression, gratitude mixed with something deeper. Then we begin. The first 3 days of meditation were frustrating. Finian had us sit facing each other, knees touching, hands clasped, while he burned herbs that filled the chapel with sweet smoke. We were meant to breathe in unison, to let our wolves recognize each other on a primal level, to build a bridge between our separate consciousnesses. But I kept losing focus. Hadrian's hands holding mine felt too intimate, too distracting. His scent surrounded me. Cedar and winter wind and that indefinable quality that was purely him. My wolf kept pushing forward, wanting closer contact, wanting to press against his chest and feel his heartbeat. Concentrate, Finian said gently on the 3rd day, sensing my struggle. You are fighting the connection rather than allowing it to form naturally. Remember, Lady Elowen, this is not about control. It is about surrender, about trusting another with the deepest parts of yourself. Surrender. The word resonated through me. I had spent 3 years in isolation, guarding myself carefully, never letting anyone close enough to risk using my power accidentally. The idea of deliberately lowering those walls terrified me. Look at me, Hadrian murmured, his voice low enough that only I could hear. Not at the king, not at the authority or the power, just at me. At the man who cannot sleep without your touch, who thinks of you during every council meeting, who would trust you with his life. I raised my eyes to his, and something shifted. Instead of seeing the Alpha King, I saw Hadrian, the boy who had tried to protect his gentler brother, the man who carried decades of guilt, the soul who wanted peace as desperately as I wanted acceptance. My breathing naturally aligned with his. In, out, in, out. Our hearts began beating in synchronization. I could feel it through the contact of our hands, through the connection that was forming between us, like a golden thread spinning itself into existence. And then, suddenly, I was not just looking into his eyes. I was looking through them. The chapel dissolved around me, replaced by a memory. His memory. I saw through a child's eyes, perhaps 6 years old, watching his brother Theodore laugh as he chased a butterfly through a sun-drenched garden. Theodore's joy was pure, unguarded, and young. Hadrian felt fierce protectiveness toward that innocence. The memory faded, and I was back in the chapel, gasping. I saw him. Theodore. Hadrian's grip on my hands tightened, and I saw her. Your sister Bryn, when she was small and you were teaching her to braid flower crowns. Before the accident, tears pricked my eyes. That memory had been one of my most precious, before I had destroyed so much between us. The connection is forming. Yes, Finian said, satisfaction evident in his voice. You are beginning to synchronize. Continue. By the 5th day, the connection between us had deepened to a level that was almost overwhelming. We no longer needed to sit in formal meditation. Simply being in the same room meant I could sense his emotional state, feel the edges of his thoughts brushing against my consciousness, and he could feel mine in return. This is what true mates experience, Finian explained, as we took a break from meditation, sitting in the chapel's small garden. That level of awareness, of connection. It is possible you are true mates, and this ritual is simply accelerating what would have occurred naturally over time. True mates. The concept should have terrified me. Instead, it felt right, like a puzzle piece finally sliding into place. I glanced at Hadrian, who stood a few feet away examining a winter rose that still bloomed despite the cold. Can true mates feel each other's pain? I asked Finian quietly. To some degree, yes, and each other's joy, each other's fear. He studied me carefully. When you perform the memory removal, the connection will amplify your power significantly. But it will also mean you experience what he experiences. His pain will become yours, at least temporarily. I can bear that. Can you? The memory he carries, it has haunted him for over 2 decades. The agony of it could break a lesser person. I thought of all the nights I had soothed Hadrian's nightmares, felt the edges of his torment even through the limited contact. I thought of Bryn's face when she could not remember our mother. the guilt that had eaten at me every day since. Pain was not foreign to me. Perhaps I could withstand his as well. I have to try, I said simply. That evening, on the 7th day of preparation, Finian declared us ready. We gathered in the chapel one final time before tomorrow's procedure. But this time, there would be no meditation. This time, Hadrian would speak aloud the full memory, sharing every detail so I would know exactly what I was searching for in the vast landscape of his mind. You do not have to do this tonight, I told him, as we sat together on the chapel steps, the evening air crisp around us. We could wait until morning, when you are fresh. No. His voice was firm. I have carried this in silence for too long. If I am to trust you with it tomorrow, I need to speak it aloud tonight. I need to hear my own words admit to what I have never fully acknowledged. I took his hand, lacing our fingers together. The connection between us hummed, strong and steady. Then I will listen, and I will not judge. He took a deep breath and began. Theodore and I were 10 years old when the fever came. It swept through the northern territories, killing dozens. Theodore caught it badly. For 2 weeks he burned with it, barely conscious. The healers said he might not survive. His voice remained controlled, but I could feel the old fear bleeding through our connection. Father kept insisting he would recover, that my brother was stronger than he looked. But I could see the truth. Theodore was dying. I squeezed his hand, offering silent support as he continued. The full moon came while he was still sick. Our first transformation was supposed to have been a ceremony, supervised and controlled, but the moon does not wait for convenience. That night, I felt my wolf rising, unstoppable. I tried to stay near Theodore, thinking I could protect him even in wolf form, but when I shifted, the fever had affected him too. He began to transform, but wrong, incomplete. He was stuck between forms, in agony, his body unable to complete the change because he was too weak. Hadrian's jaw clenched, and I felt him fighting to get the next words out. My wolf saw him like that, struggling and half-shifted, and instinct took over. He was not pack, not in that moment. He was prey, or threat. I do not even know. I attacked. I did not mean to kill him. I did not even know what I was doing. But my wolf was fully formed, strong, and Theodore was helpless. By the time I regained human consciousness, he was dying. Tears streamed down my face, but I did not interrupt. He needed to finish this. He looked at me, even as the life left his eyes. He tried to speak, but I was screaming, calling for help. Our parents came running, pulled me away from him. Father had healers work on Theodore for hours, but it was too late. The wounds I had inflicted were too severe. Hadrian's voice finally broke. My brother died because I could not control my wolf, because I was too strong, and he was too weak, and the fever should never have let that transformation happen. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the sound of distant wind through the trees. I shifted closer, wrapping both arms around him, and he buried his face in my shoulder. His body shook with silent sobs, grief finally given permission to surface after being locked away for so long. Theodore knew he was dying, I said softly when his shaking subsided. The healers had already said he would not survive. Perhaps part of him wanted to die as a wolf, fighting transformation, rather than withering away in bed. Hadrian pulled back to look at me. You think he provoked the shift deliberately? I do not know. But I think there is more to that memory than you have let yourself see. When I enter your mind tomorrow, I will look for the pieces you might have missed, the details your guilt has hidden from you. I cupped his face gently, not to absolve you entirely, but to show you the full truth, whatever that truth may be. He leaned his forehead against mine, our breaths mingling in the narrow space between us. I do not deserve your kindness. You deserve peace, I countered. And tomorrow, with the moon goddess as witness, I will do everything in my power to give that to you. We sat together until the stars emerged, holding each other in the quiet chapel garden. And when he finally walked me back to my chambers, he kissed me once more, gentle and achingly sweet, a promise of what might be possible on the other side of tomorrow's ordeal. No matter what you see in my mind, he whispered against my lips, no matter what darkness you find there, Know that you have brought light back into my life. That alone is gift beyond measure." I watched him disappear down the corridor, my heart full of determination and dread in equal measure. Tomorrow, I would enter the mind of the Alpha King and confront the demon that had haunted him for decades. Tomorrow, I would either free him or fail spectacularly. But tonight, alone in my chambers, I allowed myself to hope that love might be stronger than even the deepest trauma, that the connection forming between us could withstand anything his past might contain. Tomorrow would reveal the truth. Tonight, I simply held on to faith. Chapter 6. The Extraction. The ritual chamber had been prepared with meticulous care. Ancient stones formed a perfect circle in the eastern tower, far from the prying eyes of courtiers and servants who whispered anxiously about their king's desperate gamble. Thick candles burned at cardinal points, their flames steady despite the draft seeping through arrow slits. Bundles of dried sage and wormwood hung from iron hooks, filling the air with earthy bitterness that made Elowen's throat tighten. She stood at the threshold, studying the space that would either save Hadrian or destroy them both. The mate bond hummed beneath her ribs, a living thread connecting her racing heart to his unnaturally calm one. He stood in the chamber's center beside a heavy oak chair carved with wolf heads, his dark hair pulled back from his face, revealing the sharp angles of cheekbones and jaw. The gold chain at his throat caught candlelight as he turned toward her. "Ready?" His voice carried none of the command she'd grown accustomed to over these weeks. This was a question, genuine and raw. Elowen stepped across the threshold. "As I'll ever be." Finian waited near the eastern candles, his weathered face grave. Serene hovered by the door, wringing her hands compulsively. Both had insisted on bearing witness, though Elowen suspected Finian's presence served a more practical purpose. If something went catastrophically wrong, he knew about Omega powers and could attempt intervention. Hadrian lowered himself into the chair, gripping its arms with white-knuckled force. The vulnerability in that simple gesture, a king making himself subject to another's will, struck Elowen harder than any declaration. She moved behind him, placing her hands lightly on his temples. His skin burned fever-hot beneath her palms. "Last night you gave me the memory in words," she murmured. "Now I need you to lower every wall. Let me see it through your eyes. Feel what you felt. Don't fight me." "I won't." His shoulders loosened fractionally. "I trust you." Those 3 words settled into her bones like an oath. Elowen closed her eyes, reaching through the mate bond toward the vast landscape of his consciousness. The connection snapped taut, and suddenly she was drowning in him. Centuries of pack law memorized before adolescence. The weight of crown pressed onto his head at 19 when his father fell in battle. The endless decisions that meant life or death for thousands. His mind was a fortress of discipline and control, every thought organized with military precision. She pushed deeper, searching for the fracture where trauma lived. There, buried beneath layers of duty and determination, a wound that never healed, raw as the day it opened. Elowen dove toward it, and the world shattered into memory. She was 10 years old, standing in a stone chamber lit by torchlight. No, Hadrian was 10, and she was experiencing his child self with terrifying intimacy. Theodore lay on a narrow bed, skin flushed with fever, breathing labored. Their mother hovered nearby, pressing cool cloths to his forehead while their father paced. "The transformation will come tonight," their father growled. "Full moon won't wait for him to recover. He's too weak." Their mother's voice cracked. "If he shifts in this condition, then he'll die as a wolf should, not rotting in bed." Young Hadrian felt his own body beginning to change, bones aching with the moon's pull. He looked at Theodore, who opened glassy eyes and managed a trembling smile. "Together? Together," Hadrian promised, though terror clawed through his gut. The memory accelerated. Their parents left to transform in the courtyard, trusting the boys to manage their first shift. Hadrian's change came swift and brutal, his spine elongating, jaw cracking forward, consciousness fragmenting as instinct consumed thought. When his wolf eyes opened, the world was scent and sound and primal hunger. Theodore was still half boy, half beast, stuck between forms and whimpering in agony. The sickness had complicated everything. He lay on the stone floor, twisted and helpless. Hadrian's wolf didn't recognize him. It saw only a threat. Something wrong. Something that needed to be eliminated. The attack happened in heartbeats. Teeth closing on a too fragile throat, claws raking across ribs, the taste of blood, hot and wrong. Human consciousness slammed back into Hadrian with devastating force. He transformed back instantly, horror choking him as he realized what he'd done. Theodore lay broken and bleeding, eyes unfocused, chest barely rising. No, no, no. Hadrian pressed hands against the wounds, but there was too much blood, too much damage. This was where the memory always ended in nightmares. This was the moment that replayed endlessly. Theodore dying, Hadrian's hands stained red, the knowledge that he was a monster. But Eowyn felt something else. A fragment Hadrian had locked away so thoroughly he'd forgotten it existed. She followed that thread with surgical precision, unraveling the mental scar tissue he'd built around it. Theodore's eyes focused one last time. His lips moved, forming words without sound. But the twin bond between them carried meaning directly into Hadrian's mind. Not your fault. Wanted this. Better than withering. You gave me warrior's death. Thank you, brother. I forgive you. I love you. Then Theodore's consciousness slipped away. But his expression held peace, not fear. The smile on his bloodied lips was real. Hadrian had been so consumed by guilt that he'd buried this final gift. Unable to accept forgiveness he believed he didn't deserve. For 24 years, he'd carried only the violence, never the love that followed it. Eowyn gasped, the revelation shaking through her. This changed everything. She could feel Hadrian's present consciousness observing alongside her, finally seeing what he'd hidden from himself. His anguish poured through the bond, decades of unnecessary torment crashing over them both. She had two choices. Remove the entire memory as originally planned, leaving him free but ignorant, or remove only the guilt and self-hatred, while preserving the truth. That Theodore had orchestrated his own end with bravery. The decision crystallized instantly. Hadrian deserved to remember his brother's courage. Theodore's last gift shouldn't be erased. Eowyn began the delicate work of separating pain from truth. Her power had never been tested like this, excising specific emotional resonance while leaving factual memory intact required precision beyond anything the ancient texts described. But the mate bond amplified her abilities, and weeks of practice had honed her control to a razor's edge. She visualized the memory as a tapestry, identifying threads of corrosive guilt and pulling them loose without destroying the overall image. Each thread dissolved under her focus, burning away like morning fog. The violence remained, but its poison drained away, leaving only tragic necessity. Theodore's final message blazed bright and clear. Sweat dripped down her temples. The chamber spun around her, though her eyes were still closed. Finian's voice came from far away, her pulses racing. How much longer? Almost done, she whispered. One last thread, thick and stubborn, the core belief that had defined Hadrian for 2 decades. I am a monster who killed my brother. She grasped it with her mind and pulled. It resisted, so deeply rooted that removing it felt like tearing out a tree. Eowyn gritted her teeth and pulled harder. The bond between her and Hadrian flared white-hot, and suddenly his strength was hers. The thread snapped. The memory restructured itself instantly, truth rising to the surface where lies had festered. Hadrian would remember everything. The fever, the botched transformation, the attack, the blood. But now he would also remember Theodore's peace, his choice, his forgiveness. Eowyn released her hold on his mind and staggered backward. Her legs gave out, but strong arms caught her. Hadrian had moved faster than humanly possible, abandoning the chair to cradle her against his chest. I've got you, he murmured, his voice shaking. She forced her eyes open. His face swam into focus. Those golden eyes bright with unshed tears, wonder and devastation warring across his features. Did it work? He forgave me. Hadrian's voice broke. Eowyn, he forgave me. He wanted it. He chose it. All this time I thought. He couldn't continue. Emotion strangling the words. I know. She lifted a trembling hand to his face, wiping away the tear that finally fell. I saw everything. You gave him back to me. Hadrian buried his face in her hair, his body shaking with sobs he'd suppressed for decades. Not just took away the pain, you gave me the truth. Finian approached slowly, his expression odd. The memory remains? You removed only the trauma? Elowen nodded weakly. He needed to remember. Just not the way he was remembering. Extraordinary. The old counselor's eyes shone with moisture. I've never heard of such precision. Seren had collapsed against the wall, crying openly. True mates. Hadrian rose with Elowen still in his arms, cradling her carefully. Take me to our chambers, she whispered. I need to rest. As long as you need. He carried her from the ritual chamber, leaving Finian and Seren to extinguish the candles. The walk through silent corridors passed in a blur. In the royal bedchamber, Hadrian laid her on the massive bed with exquisite gentleness. Elowen's exhaustion ran bone deep. The mental exertion had drained her completely, but triumph sang through her veins. She'd done it. Hadrian stretched out beside her, pulling her into his arms. For long moments they simply breathed together, heartbeats synchronizing. Finally he spoke, voice raw but steady. You could have removed everything, made me forget Theodore entirely. It would have been easier, but wrong. Elowen traced the gold chain at his throat. He was your brother. He loved you. That deserves to be remembered. I dreamed of him every night for 24 years, and every dream was a nightmare. Hadrian's voice filled with wonder. Now, when I close my eyes, I can see him smiling. I can hear him thanking me. That's all I wanted, she murmured. To give you peace. You gave me more than that. He pressed his lips to her forehead. You gave me redemption. And I'm asking you to stay. Not as my healer, but as my mate. My queen. Through the haze of approaching sleep, Elowen smiled. Ask me again when I'm not about to pass out. I'll ask you every day until you answer. His arms tightened protectively. Sleep now. I'll be here. She wanted to say something profound, but consciousness was already slipping away. The last thing she registered was the steady rhythm of his heartbeat and the absolute safety of his embrace. For the first time in 3 years, Elowen fell asleep without fearing her power. And for the first time in 24 years, Hadrian closed his eyes without dreading nightmares. Hours later, Elowen woke to find him still holding her, his breathing deep and peaceful. True sleep, unmarred by torment. She traced the strong line of his jaw. He stirred, golden eyes opening slowly. How long? A few hours. She stretched cautiously. How do you feel? Hadrian considered seriously. Lighter. Like I've been carrying boulders and someone finally lifted them. He caught her hand, pressing it over his heart. Whole. You made me whole. We made each other whole. Elowen laced their fingers together. I spent 3 years believing my power was a curse. You showed me it could be a gift. Then we're even. His smile held warmth she'd never seen before, though I'm still going to ask that question daily. She laughed. You're relentless. I'm a king. Relentless is a requirement. He rolled her beneath him gently. But I can be patient. Take all the time you need. Elowen looked up at him, this powerful man who'd demanded she cure him, and ended up healing her instead, and knew her answer. But a small part of her wanted to make him work for it. Ask me tomorrow, she whispered. Tomorrow, he agreed, and kissed her until both of them forgot about everything else. Chapter 7. The Assembly. Elowen accepted Hadrian's proposal 3 days after the ritual, standing in the castle gardens under a sky heavy with approaching storm clouds. He'd asked every morning as promised, and on the 3rd morning she'd simply kissed him instead of deflecting. That was answer enough. The announcement rippled through the kingdom within hours. Messengers rode to every regional territory, carrying news that their Alpha King had chosen a mate, an Omega, with the rare and dangerous gift of memory manipulation. By evening, responses began arriving. Most were congratulatory, formal declarations of loyalty from lesser alphas, who knew better than to question their king's choices. But 3 letters carried a different tone, and Finian brought them to Hadrian's study with a grim expression. "The Northern Territories," the old counselor said, spreading the parchments across the heavy wooden desk. "Alpha Vaughn, Alpha Cormac, and Alpha Ronan. They're calling for a formal assembly." Hadrian read through each letter, his jaw tightening with every line. Elowen stood beside him, reading over his shoulder. The words were carefully diplomatic, but the message underneath was clear. "Prove she's safe, or we won't recognize her as queen." "They're questioning my judgment," Hadrian said quietly, though his voice carried an edge sharp enough to cut. "They're afraid," Elowen corrected, though her stomach twisted with anxiety. "An Omega who can reach into minds and erase whatever she wants? I'd be afraid too. You would never—" "They don't know that." She placed a hand on his shoulder, feeling the tension coiled there. "They only know the stories. Omega powers that went wrong, caused madness, destroyed packs. They need to see for themselves." Finian nodded slowly. "The assembly is in 2 weeks. All regional alphas will attend for the quarterly council. It's tradition. They'd be coming anyway. But now they'll be watching her specifically. Then let them watch." Hadrian covered Elowen's hand with his own. "You've done nothing wrong. You saved me when no one else could. That's all they need to know." But Elowen knew it wouldn't be that simple. She spent the next 2 weeks preparing, studying every scroll Finian could find about political protocol and alpha hierarchy. Seren helped her choose appropriate clothing, a deep purple gown that complemented her unusual eyes, elegant, but not ostentatious. The gold circlet Hadrian commissioned for her was simple, just a thin band with a single violet stone. "You look like a queen," Seren said the morning of the assembly, adjusting the circlet carefully in Elowen's hair. "I feel like I'm about to be judged by a pack of wolves." Elowen's hands trembled slightly as she smoothed the fabric of her gown. "You are," Seren said bluntly, then softened. "But you're not alone. The king stands with you. Finian stands with you. And everyone in this castle has seen what you did for him. We know who you are." The great hall had been prepared for the assembly. Long tables formed a U-shape, with Hadrian's throne at the head, and seats for 20 regional alphas along the sides. Elowen's place was beside Hadrian's throne, a smaller chair, but elevated on the same platform, a statement of equality that would not be missed. The alphas arrived throughout the morning, each announced by title and territory. Elowen watched them enter, studying faces and body language. Most were older men, scarred from decades of maintaining their territories. A few were younger, eyes sharp with ambition. And 3, Vaughn, Cormac, and Ronan, entered together, their expressions carefully neutral but their posture aggressive. When everyone was seated, Hadrian stood. The room fell silent instantly. "We gather as tradition demands," he began, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "to discuss the state of our territories, settle disputes, and ensure the continued strength of our people. But first, I present to you my chosen mate and your future queen, Elowen of the Western Woods." Elowen rose, keeping her spine straight and her chin level. She could feel every eye on her, assessing, judging, measuring her worth. The mate bond thrummed between her and Hadrian, a steady reminder that she wasn't alone. "We congratulate you, my king," Alpha Cormac said, his tone formal. "It is good for a ruler to have a mate. Stability strengthens the crown." "Indeed," Alpha Vaughn added, and Elowen caught the subtle emphasis. "Though we wonder at the choice of one so uniquely gifted, memory manipulation is a power that raises questions." "What questions?" Hadrian's voice dropped dangerously low. Vaughn met his gaze without flinching. "Practical ones. If our queen can reach into minds and change what we remember, how do we know what's real? How do we know our own thoughts are ours?" Murmurs rippled through the hall. Other alphas shifted in their seats, some nodding agreement, others watching Hadrian warily. "You question my mate's honor," Hadrian said flatly. "That is questioning mine. We question nothing," Alpha Ronan interjected smoothly. "We simply seek reassurance. Surely the lady understands our concern. A demonstration, perhaps, of her control and discretion." Elowen felt Hadrian's anger spike through the bond. She touched his arm lightly, a a silent request. He glanced at her, golden eyes blazing, but she nodded once. "Let me handle this. You want proof that I won't abuse my power," she said, addressing the hall directly. "That's reasonable. Alpha Vaughn, would you volunteer for a demonstration?" Vaughn's eyes narrowed. "What kind of demonstration?" "I'll enter your mind, locate a specific memory you choose, and share it with everyone here. No erasure, no manipulation. Just proof that I can be precise and controlled." She paused, holding his gaze. "Unless you have memories you'd prefer to keep private?" The challenge hung in the air. Vaughn couldn't refuse without appearing weak or suspicious. He stood slowly, moving to the center of the hall. "Very well. I'll choose a memory of my first hunt as Alpha. Something significant but harmless." Elowen descended from the platform, aware of Hadrian's protective instinct flaring through the bond. She stopped in front of Vaughn, who stood a full head taller, his posture radiating dominance. She'd practiced this technique with Finian for days, a modified version of what she'd done with Hadrian, but instead of erasing, she would project the memory to everyone present. "Think of the memory clearly," she instructed, placing her hands lightly on his temples. "Don't fight me." Vaughn's mind was different from Hadrian's, more chaotic, less disciplined, with sharp edges of ambition and buried resentment. She pushed past his surface thoughts, searching for the hunt memory he'd brought forward. Found it. A winter morning, snow deep, a massive elk with a scarred flank. But there was something else, closer to the surface, pulsing with recent emotion. Another memory, one he definitely hadn't intended to share. Elowen hesitated, then dove deeper, curious despite herself. She saw Vaughn in a stone chamber, moonlight streaming through narrow windows. An older man lay dying on a bed, the previous alpha of his territory. Vaughn stood over him, not helping, just watching, waiting. The old man's eyes held accusation and understanding. This wasn't illness. This was poison, slow and untraceable. Vaughn had killed him to take his place. Elowen's breath caught. This was the real test. She could expose him right now, share this truth with every alpha present. It would prove her power beyond doubt. It would also start a war, or she could show them exactly what they asked for. The hunt memory, and keep this secret. Prove she could be trusted with dangerous knowledge. The decision took only seconds. She pulled the hunt memory forward and channeled it outward, using the amplified power of her mate bond to project it into every mind in the hall simultaneously. The technique Finian had taught her, the one she'd practiced in secret, snapped into place perfectly. Every alpha saw what Vaughn remembered: the snowy forest, the careful tracking, the moment of the kill. Clean, honorable, exactly what he'd wanted them to see. Elowen released her hold on his mind and stepped back. Vaughn's face had gone pale, his eyes wide with shock. He knew what she'd found. He knew what she could have revealed. "The memory of Alpha Vaughn's first hunt," she announced to the hall. "As requested. No manipulation, no erasure. Just observation and sharing." The alphas stirred, many looking impressed. Alpha Cormac nodded slowly, a remarkable demonstration of control and discretion. That last word was aimed at Vaughn, who still stood frozen. Elowen met his eyes directly, letting him see her choice reflected there. "I could have destroyed you. I didn't. Remember that." Vaughn slowly bent his head in acknowledgement. Not quite submission, but recognition. "The lady has proven her skill," he said, his voice rough. "And her wisdom." Elowen returned to the platform, feeling Hadrian's pride and confusion through the bond. He didn't know what she'd found, but he trusted her judgment. That trust was more valuable than any public display of power. "Are there further questions?" Hadrian asked, his tone making it clear there had better not be. Alpha Cormac stood. "No questions, my king. I believe we can all agree that your mate is both powerful and responsible. The combination is rare and valuable. We welcome her." One by one, the other alphas rose and bowed, some deeper than others, but all acknowledging her place. Vaughn was last, his bow the deepest of all. Political theater, perhaps, but the message was clear. She had passed their test. The rest of the assembly proceeded with typical business. Border disputes, trade agreements, resource allocation. Elowen sat beside Hadrian, learning the rhythms of governance, noting which alphas worked together and which barely tolerated each other. Finian sat below the platform, occasionally passing notes with additional context. When the formal proceedings finally ended, the alphas dispersed to guest quarters. A feast would follow that evening, another tradition. But first, Hadrian pulled Elowen into a private anteroom. "What did you see in Vaughn's mind?" he asked immediately. "Something happened." "I felt your shock." Elowen hesitated, then told him everything. Hadrian's expression darkened with each word. "He murdered his predecessor. That's treason against pack law. You should do nothing." Elowen interrupted gently. "Not yet. Vaughn knows I could expose him any time. That makes him controllable. An enemy with a leash is more useful than a martyr with sympathizers." Hadrian stared at her, then laughed, a sound of genuine surprise. "You've been queen for less than a day and you're already thinking like one. I had a good teacher." She stepped closer, resting her forehead against his chest. "Was I wrong? Should I have revealed him?" "No." Hadrian wrapped his arms around her. "You were right. Strategic mercy is sometimes stronger than righteous justice. But I want Vaughn watched. Closely." "Agreed." Elowen closed her eyes, letting herself relax for the first time in hours. That was terrifying. "You were magnificent." He tilted her chin up, kissing her softly. "Every alpha in that hall now knows you're powerful enough to destroy them, but wise enough not to. That's exactly what a queen should be." The evening feast was elaborate but tense. Elowen sat beside Hadrian at the high table, navigating conversations with various alphas and their companions. Some were genuinely welcoming. Others were politely wary. Vaughn avoided her entirely, which she considered a victory. 3 days after the assembly, as the last regional alphas departed, a different messenger arrived. This one was young, travel-stained, and clearly exhausted. Finian brought him directly to Hadrian's study where Elowen was reviewing trade documents. "Message from the Western Woods, my king," the messenger said, bowing quickly. "A woman claiming to be the queen's sister. She's traveled 2 weeks to reach the castle." Elowen's heart stopped. "Bryn?" She gave the name Bryn, yes. "She's waiting at the main gate." Elowen didn't remember running through the corridors, but suddenly she was in the courtyard, breathing hard, staring at a young woman with darker hair than hers, but the same delicate bone structure. 3 years older than the girl she'd left behind, but unmistakably her sister. "Bryn," Elowen whispered. Her sister looked up, eyes, ordinary brown, not violet, widening. "Elowen?" They met in the middle of the courtyard, neither quite sure how to bridge the gap of years and hurt. Finally Bryn spoke, her voice shaking. "I heard you became queen. I had to see if it was true. If you were really here, I'm here." Elowen's voice broke. "I'm so sorry. For what I did. For leaving. For—" "Stop." Bryn held up a hand. "I didn't come for apologies. I came because—" She trailed off, struggling with words. "Because I don't remember parts of my childhood. I know something's missing. And I think you're the reason why." Elowen nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. "I am. I was 15. I didn't have control. We were fighting and I touched you and you took 2 years from me." Bryn's expression was unreadable, including memories of our mother. "She died when I was 10, but I can't remember her face, can't remember her voice. There's just nothing." The pain in those words cut deeper than any blade. "I'm sorry," Elowen whispered again, knowing it wasn't enough. "Can you fix it?" Bryn asked bluntly. "You're queen now. You've obviously learned control. Can you give back what you took?" Elowen looked at her sister, this woman who'd lived 3 years with a hole in her past, who'd somehow found the courage to seek out the person who'd caused it. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've never tried to restore erased memories. I don't know if it's even possible. But you'll try." "Yes." Elowen reached out slowly, giving Bryn time to pull away. When she didn't, Elowen took her hands. "I'll try. even if it takes months. Even if it doesn't work, Bryn finished. At least I'll know you tried. That's more than I had yesterday. Hadrian had followed Elowen to the courtyard, keeping his distance to give them privacy. Now he approached, his presence commanding but not threatening. You're welcome to stay in the castle as long as needed, he told Bryn. Family of the Queen is family of mine. Bryn stared at him. This legendary Alpha King she'd only heard about in stories. Then looked back at Elowen. You really are, Queen. I really am. Elowen managed a watery smile. It's been a strange few months. I want to hear everything. Bryn squeezed her hands. But first, when can we start? Trying to fix what was broken. Tomorrow, Elowen promised. We'll start tomorrow. That night, lying beside Hadrian in the massive royal bed, Elowen stared at the ceiling and wondered if she was making promises she couldn't keep. You'll find a way, Hadrian murmured, reading her anxiety through the bond. You always do. What if I can't? What if the memories are just gone? Then you'll have tried. And your sister will know you cared enough to try. Sometimes that's all we can offer. The attempt itself. Elowen turned to face him, studying his features in the dim candlelight. When did you become so wise? When I met an Omega who taught me that broken things can be healed. He pulled her closer. You gave me back my brother's love. Maybe you'll give your sister back your mother's. And if you can't, at least you'll give her the truth. That matters too. Elowen closed her eyes, letting his certainty anchor her. Tomorrow she would face another impossible task. Tonight, she would rest in the arms of her mate and remember that she wasn't alone anymore. Outside their window, the moon rose full and bright over the kingdom that was now hers to protect. Queen of shifters, wielder of dangerous power, and finally, coming home to the family she'd thought lost forever. Chapter 8. Restoration. The restoration process began the following morning in the same chamber where Elowen had healed Hadrian months earlier. Bryn sat in the carved chair, hands gripping the armrests with white-knuckled intensity. She'd spent the previous evening catching up with Elowen over dinner, hearing about the forced journey to the castle, the weeks of research, the ritual that had changed everything. But now, facing the actual procedure, fear shadowed her features. What if it hurts? Bryn asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Elowen knelt beside the chair, meeting her sister's eyes. It shouldn't. When I took the memories, it was violent. I didn't know what I was doing, but restoration should feel different, like remembering a dream, gradually becoming clearer. This was not about carving out pain as she had done with Hadrian, but about coaxing something fragile back into being, without shattering the life that had grown around its absence. Should? Bryn caught the uncertainty. I've never done this before, Elowen admitted. I can't promise it'll work. The memories might be too damaged, or gone completely. But I have to try. Bryn nodded slowly, then surprised Elowen by smiling. You know what? Even if it doesn't work, this is more than I ever expected. 3 years ago, our family cast you out. Now you're queen, and you're still trying to fix what broke between us. That's already more than I deserve. You deserved better than what I did to you, Elowen said quietly. You were just a child. So were you. Bryn reached out, touching Elowen's hand briefly. We were both children. Let's stop blaming the girl you were and focus on who you are now. Hadrian stood near the door with Finian, giving the sisters privacy while remaining close. Elowen drew strength from his presence through the mate bond, then placed her hands gently on Bryn's temples. Close your eyes, she instructed. Think about Mother. Not trying to remember, just thinking about what you know of her. Her name, the fact that she existed, the shape of the absence where memories should be. Bryn obeyed, her breathing slowing as she concentrated. Elowen closed her own eyes and reached into her sister's mind. Carefully, delicately. Nothing like the violent intrusion that had caused this damage years ago. Bryn's consciousness was different from Hadrian's disciplined fortress, or Vaughn's chaotic ambition. It was gentler, more artistic in its organization, with threads of creativity woven through everything. And there, buried deep beneath years of new experiences, were the scars Elowen had left. She'd imagined erased memories as simply gone, Empty space where something used to be. But that wasn't accurate. The memories were still there, fragmented and disconnected, like a shattered mosaic with pieces scattered across the floor of Bryn's mind. Elowen had severed the connections that made them accessible, but the raw material remained. Hope surged through her. If the pieces still existed, maybe they could be reassembled. She started with the smallest fragments. A flash of brown hair, the sound of laughter, the smell of bread baking. Isolated sensory details that meant nothing alone. Carefully, she began drawing them together, looking for patterns, for threads that connected one piece to another. There, a more substantial fragment. Their mother singing while working in the garden. Voice slightly off-key but warm. Elowen reinforced the neural pathways around it, strengthening connections that time had weakened. The memory solidified, becoming accessible again. Bryn gasped softly. I hear her. She's singing about roses? No, not roses. Lavender. Keep listening. Elowen murmured, not breaking concentration. She found another fragment nearby, their mother's hands covered in dirt, showing young Bryn how to plant seeds. Connected it to the first memory. Then another and another, like threading beads on a string. The work was painstaking and exhausting. Each fragment had to be located, assessed for integrity, and carefully reintegrated into the larger tapestry of Bryn's accessible memories. Some pieces were too damaged, the connections too thoroughly severed. Those were lost forever. But others, more than Elowen had dared hope, could be salvaged. She found the memory of their mother's face. Not perfectly clear, slightly blurred at the edges, but recognizable. Found the memory of her final weeks, the illness that had taken her, the whispered goodbye she'd given both daughters. Those memories were painful, but they were precious too. Proof that their mother had loved them until the very end. Hours passed. Sweat dripped down Elowen's face, her muscles trembling with exhaustion. But she couldn't stop. Not yet. There was one more cluster of fragments, tucked away in a protected corner of Bryn's mind. The last conversation between mother and daughter, the night before she died. Elowen almost missed it, hidden so deeply that even Bryn's subconscious had buried it. But when she found it, she understood why. This memory hurt. Their mother, weak and fading, making Bryn promise to forgive Elowen someday. To remember that sisters were forever, and love was stronger than mistakes. Promise me, their mother whispered in the memory. Don't hate her. She'll blame herself more than enough. You be the one who forgives. Young Bryn, only 10 years old, had promised through her tears, then forgotten the promise entirely when Elowen had accidentally erased it 2 years later. Elowen carefully, reverently, restored that final gift from their mother. The connection snapped into place, and suddenly Bryn was sobbing openly, tears streaming down her face. She made me promise, Bryn choked out. I forgot. When you took the memories, I forgot I'd promised to forgive you. Oh gods, Elowen. I broke my promise to her. Elowen released her hold on Bryn's mind and collapsed forward, catching herself on the arms of the chair. You didn't break it, she managed, her voice hoarse with exhaustion. You kept it. You came here. You gave me a chance. That's forgiveness. Bryn pulled Elowen into a fierce embrace, both sisters crying, 3 years of pain and guilt finally bleeding out between them. Hadrian moved forward instinctively, but Finian caught his arm, shaking his head. This moment belonged to them alone. When they finally pulled apart, Bryn cupped Elowen's face in her hands, studying her with eyes that now held recovered memories. I remember Mother's face. I remember how she smelled like lavender and honey. I remember her terrible singing and her amazing bread and the way she'd braid our hair before bed. She laughed through her tears. I remember. Not everything, Elowen warned. Some pieces were too damaged. There are still gaps. But I have enough. Bryn pressed their foreheads together. I have her back. You gave her back to me. How can I ever... You don't owe me anything. Elowen pulled back, meeting her sister's eyes. I took her from you first. I'm so glad I could fix it. At least partly. Hadrian finally approached, offering Elowen a cup of water. She drank gratefully, her hands shaking with exhaustion. The procedure had drained her even more thoroughly than healing Hadrian's trauma. Restoration was apparently harder than removal. "You should rest," he said quietly, concern radiating through the bond. "In a moment." Elowen turned back to Bryn. "Will you stay? In the castle, I mean. Not just for a visit, but—" "Stay?" Bryn hesitated, glancing around the ritual chamber, then at Hadrian. "As what?" "I'm nobody important. Just a girl from the western woods." "You're my sister," Elowen said firmly. "That makes you family to the crown. And I need family. I need someone who knew me before all this." She gestured vaguely at the castle around them. "Someone who can remind me who I was when being queen feels like too much." "I'd like that," Bryn admitted. "I have nothing back home anyway. The pack that cast you out wasn't particularly welcoming to me either after you left. Being the sister of the cursed Omega isn't much better than being the cursed Omega herself." Finian stepped forward, his expression thoughtful. "If I may suggest, the castle has need of someone to work with the young Omegas. We're establishing a sanctuary for those with unusual gifts. They need teachers who understand what it's like to be different, to be feared for something they can't control." Bryn's eyes widened. "You want me to teach? But I don't have any powers." "Exactly," Finian said gently. "You can teach them how to live alongside those who do, how to build relationships despite fear and misunderstanding. That's a skill just as valuable as any gift. Besides," Elowen added with a small smile, "you survived having me as a sister. That qualifies you to handle anything." Bryn laughed. A real laugh, unforced and warm. "When you put it that way, yes, I'll stay." The weeks that followed transformed the castle in subtle ways. Bryn settled into her role with surprising ease, working with Finian to design curriculum for the sanctuary program. The first young Omegas began arriving. Frightened, rejected, uncertain, Bryn welcomed them with the same compassion their mother had once shown both sisters. Elowen watched her sister bloom in this new environment and felt pieces of her own past healing alongside the memories she'd restored. They spent evenings together, sometimes talking, sometimes just existing in comfortable silence, relearning each other, rebuilding what had been broken. News from Riverbend began to arrive in slow, careful waves. Her father's first letter was stiff and formal, full of titles, acknowledgments, and just one unsteady line of regret. He did not beg for forgiveness. Instead, he pledged in precise, ink-dark strokes that no Omega with a gift like hers would ever again be cast out from his territory. Elowen read the words twice before setting the parchment aside. She was not ready to answer him, and perhaps she never would be, but for the first time, the thought of her father no longer felt like an open wound, only a scar she had learned to live around. 3 months after the memory restoration, Elowen woke one morning with unusual nausea. At first she dismissed it as exhaustion from a late night studying trade agreements. But when it continued for 3 days, Saren gave her a knowing look and sent for the castle's healer. The confirmation left Elowen stunned and terrified. Pregnant. She was carrying the heir to the shifter throne. Hadrian's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Fierce protectiveness mixed with wonder and fear. "Are you sure?" he asked for the 3rd time, staring at Elowen's still flat stomach as if he could see through to the life growing inside. "The healer was very sure," Elowen said, her own hand resting over her abdomen. "About 6 weeks along. What if the child inherits your power?" The question burst from Hadrian like he'd been holding it back. "What if they can't control it? What if—" "Then we'll teach them." Elowen caught his hands, grounding him. "From the very beginning, before the power even manifests, we'll teach them control and compassion, and the weight of what they can do. They'll never feel cursed or rejected. They'll never be alone with it like I was. You're not afraid?" "I'm terrified," she admitted. "But I'm also hopeful. We have resources I never had. We have Finian's knowledge, the sanctuary program, each other. And if our child has my power or something similar, they'll grow up knowing it's a gift, not a curse. That makes all the difference." Hadrian pulled her close, his hand joining hers over her stomach. "A gift," he repeated quietly. "You really believe that? I didn't used to." Elowen leaned into his embrace. I spent 3 years believing I was cursed, that my power was a punishment. But you showed me it could heal. It could save. It could restore what was broken. She tilted her head back to look at him. If our child inherits any part of that, they'll be remarkable. The announcement of the pregnancy sent ripples of celebration through the kingdom. Finian immediately began gathering every scroll about pregnant Omegas with strong powers. Bryn appointed herself official protector, fussing over Elowen until Hadrian joked they'd need to establish a schedule to share worrying duties. As Elowen's body changed, so did her perspective on everything that had happened. The forced journey to the castle no longer felt like kidnapping, but like fate. The weeks of research and practice no longer felt like imprisonment, but like necessary preparation. Even the terror of the ritual chamber had led to healing. Not just for Hadrian, but for herself. 6 months into the pregnancy, Elowen stood on the castle balcony watching the sun set over the kingdom. Her hand rested on her swollen belly, feeling the child move beneath her palm. Hadrian joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind, his own hands covering hers. "Nervous about the birth?" he asked softly. "A little," she admitted. "But mostly I'm thinking about what comes after. The sanctuary has 12 young Omegas now. Bryn is training 3 more instructors. Vaughn has been unexpectedly cooperative since the assembly. Because you hold his secrets," Hadrian reminded her. "Because I chose mercy," Elowen corrected. "And he knows the value of that. We've changed things, haven't we? Made the kingdom safer for people like me. Like our child will be." "You've changed things," Hadrian said firmly. "I just supported you. You gave me the chance." She turned in his arms, studying the face she'd come to love more than she'd thought possible. "That night when you demanded I erase your memories, what would you have done if I'd refused completely? If I'd run? Hunted you down?" he said honestly, then smiled at her expression. "But I would have failed. You're too clever to be caught if you don't want to be. I think somehow you chose to stay, even when you could have left. Maybe not that first night, but later. When you came to me during the nightmares. When you agreed to try the restoration. You chose this. I chose you," Elowen agreed. "Even when I was terrified. Even when I didn't understand what we were becoming. I chose you." The baby kicked hard, making them both laugh. "Apparently someone approves," Hadrian murmured, his hand moving to where the movement had been strongest. 3 months later, their daughter was born under a full moon, a tiny thing with Elowen's violet eyes and Hadrian's dark hair. She came into the world squalling indignantly, already showing the fierce temperament of her father. They named her Lyra, after Hadrian's mother. Finian examined the baby carefully, looking for early signs of power manifestation. "Too soon to tell," he concluded. "But her aura is strong. Whatever gifts she inherits, they'll be formidable." Bryn held her niece with practiced ease, having helped care for several Omega children in the sanctuary. "She's perfect," she declared. "Powerful or not, gifted or not, she's already loved. That's what matters." Elowen watched her sister cradle the baby and felt a surge of gratitude so intense it brought tears to her eyes. Everything that had broken between them had been repaired. Everything that had been lost had been restored. Not perfectly. There were still gaps in Bryn's recovered memories, still scars from their years apart. But they had each other again. They had family. That night, with Lyra sleeping in a cradle beside their bed and Hadrian dozing in a chair after refusing to leave them alone, Elowen reflected on the strange journey that had brought her here, from isolated cabin to royal castle, from cursed Omega to queen, from destroyer of memories to restorer of them. She'd told Hadrian once that power without purpose was a prison. But love had given her power purpose. Love had transformed curse into gift, isolation into belonging, fear into hope. The castle had established a tradition now. Every full moon, young Omegas with unusual gifts gathered in the great hall to share their progress, their struggles, their victories. No one was turned away. No one was called cursed. And every child who came through those doors learned what Elowen herself had only recently discovered, that being different wasn't something to hide or fear, but something to understand and master and ultimately use for good. Lyra would grow up in that environment, She would never know the loneliness Elowen had endured. Whatever powers she developed, she would learn to wield them with confidence and compassion. She would have parents who understood, mentors who cared, and a kingdom that valued her gifts rather than fearing them. Elowen rose carefully from the bed and moved to the cradle, looking down at her sleeping daughter. Lyra's tiny hand curled around her finger, grip surprisingly strong for someone so small. "Your father taught me that strength includes compassion," Elowen whispered to the sleeping baby, "that a ruler can govern with heart as well as authority. And I'll teach you that power is a responsibility, not a weapon. That the strongest gift we have is choosing mercy when we could choose destruction." Hadrian stirred in his chair, opening golden eyes that immediately found her. "Talking to her already? She should know who we are," Elowen said softly. "What we believe. What we'll teach her." He stood, joining her beside the cradle, wrapping one arm around her shoulders. "She'll be extraordinary," he said with absolute certainty. "Just like her mother. She'll be loved," Elowen corrected. "That's all that matters." Outside their window, the moon shone full and bright over a kingdom transformed. Where Omegas with dangerous gifts had once been rejected and isolated, they now found sanctuary and training. Where fear had ruled, understanding slowly grew. It wasn't perfect, change never happened overnight. But it was happening. And in the royal chambers, surrounded by the family she'd rebuilt from ashes, Elowen finally felt what she'd been searching for her entire life: home. Not a place, but people. Not perfection, but acceptance. Not power alone, but power tempered with love and wielded for protection rather than destruction. The curse had become a gift. The monster had become a healer, and the isolated Omega in a forest cabin had become a queen who changed the world simply by choosing compassion over fear. It was more than she'd ever dreamed possible. It was everything she'd never known she needed. It was home. The end.